Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 688. I guess so. Chapter 688. I guess so. I'm rather surprised by the amount that we've managed to make. I didn't expect people to actually buy from us. Counting the numerous sacks in front of him, Anaz's eyes shone. I was also staring at the money with the same look. Following Loan's appearance, we managed to acquire our fair number of customers. That isn't surprising if you think about it. And suddenly spoke, staring at the coins in front of us as her eyes squinted a little. Reaching forward, she tossed one of the sacks in the air to feel their weight before putting them back down on the table as Anaz turned his attention towards her. What do you mean? I mean what I mean. And picked up another sack and looked through it. Following the recent event with the gigantic monster and the city, most people are likely scared and worried. You of all people know what most people do when they're scared. That is? Anaz looked at her cluelessly. I was similarly lost, but after a little bit of thought it struck me as I opened my mouth to answer. They try to get stronger. Yes. With a simple nod and put the sack down. Since you never know if an incident similar to this one might happen again, everyone is purchasing bones in order to become stronger. This is after all the fastest and most effective way to become stronger. You can say that the demand for bones has shot through the roof. Ah! Anaz finally appeared to understand as he slapped his fist against his open palm. That makes sense. I guess that kind of explains why the place is so busy. That's not all. And turned her attention towards the numerous bones that we had. Our prices are also relatively lower than most other vendors. It's no surprise that we managed to sell so much. Right? She wasn't wrong here either. Our prices were indeed a lot lower than most of the other vendors. It was both good and bad. It was bad in the sense that most vendors here had some sort of agreement with each other in order to keep the prices consistent, and with us selling it at a lower value, it made their entire agreement go up in smoke. Good in the sense that we were able to make a lot of money. Either way, with and present, none of the vendors were even able to do a single thing besides glare in our direction. So what if they were annoyed? And would slap them out of this place if they so much as said something? No wonder. No wonder. I thought I was going crazy when I felt the numerous glares around me. Anaz appeared to have had another understanding. I felt a little sorry for him. Of the three of us, he had probably been the one who had worked the most. He didn't really get the chance to think about these matters. Whatever the case is, we've managed to get what we wanted. I think it's time we close up shop and go back. Looking around and seeing the crowd slowly starting to thin out, I knew that it was time for us to end the sale. While we still had quite a lot of bones to sell, we were no longer in need of money. The bones would just go back to and who could sell them on her own. Turning around and staring at them, I squatted down before separating the bones in terms of rank. It was the least I could do. Wham! Yawning, Anaz also appeared to agree as he turned around and prepared to clean up. However, right as he did, a shadow cast over us as Anaz raised his head to speak. Sorry, but we're... However, halfway through his words, he appeared to stop. A strange silence filled the surroundings as I raised my brow. Why did it suddenly go silent? What's going on? Confused, I turned around to see what was happening, but the moment I did, my entire body froze, rooted in place as I felt my heart and breath stop. A pair of obsidian eyes, ones I was so familiar with, locked onto me, and in that instant I stood frozen. My mind went blank, thoughts scattered like ash in the wind as the world around me seemed to halt in eerie, suspended silence. She just stared at me. No words. No expressions. She just stared. And yet her stare seemed to say a million words as I struggled to think properly. You're that woman from before. It was Anaz's voice that snapped me out of my state as he stared at Delilah with wide eyes. Judging from his expression, he appeared to recognize her, as his expression looked incredibly tense. Thinking about it, he was with me when she appeared back then. The same was for and who took a step back, her entire body tense. And yet, despite their actions, Delilah didn't move at all. She just kept her gaze fixed on me. Feeling her gaze, I opened my mouth again, trying to get words out. But nothing really came out. Regardless of how hard I tried, I couldn't muster a single word. Why was this so hard? It felt as though her gaze weighed down on me like some sort of boulder that was the size of an entire planet. It kept me rooted in place, preventing me from moving at all. The only thing I could do was scratch the side of my face nervously. In the end, it was Anaz's voice that prompted me to lift my head. What is going on? Did he offend you? I paused. Hearing Anaz's words, I stared in his direction and found myself at a complete loss. Was this really the first thing that he thought when he saw her staring at me like that? Was I that unreliable? Well, moving my head to stare in Delilah's direction, and meeting her gaze once more, my lips parted as I finally seemed to find my voice again. With a complicated look, I nodded subtly. I guess you could say that. Thinking about everything that she had gone through because of me and her current expression, it was safe to say that she was anything but pleased with me. Oh God! Anaz's face went ghostly pale the moment my words left my mouth, and mirrored his reaction, both of them staring at me with a mix of horror and barely contained anger. Their expressions seemed to say, "Why would you provoke her? We're going to die because of you." They really didn't seem to be happy with me. However, I was at a point where I could no longer care about them, as I felt Delilah's gaze become even more piercing as my head unconsciously lowered. "I'm sorry." Words started to flow out of my mouth as I stared at the table beneath. I had my circumstances. Honestly, I didn't even know what I was saying. I wanted to say it, but I couldn't. I also am sorry for the thing I did before. It was a misunderstanding. I was also joking. I didn't mean to come off like that. I was just rambling at this point. Was I making excuses or explaining myself? I didn't know. I just felt like I needed to say everything. I know it's my fault and you are probably very angry at me. Maybe you won't even forgive me for what I did, but... Yuka! Bang! A sudden invisible force slammed into my chest, hurling me backward. I crashed hard against the wall, the impact knocking the air from my lungs before collapsing onto the jagged pile of bones beneath me. Lazarus! Shit! Both Anaz and looked in my direction in shock, ready to move to me, but stopped right as I raised my hand. "I'm okay." I sat stunned for a moment, my thoughts frozen as I held onto my chest. It didn't hurt. In fact, no part of my body hurt. She had clearly held back a lot, but slowly lifting my head and staring at her face, I suddenly felt like I had been hit by a truck. Although subtle, I saw it. I saw the faint tremble in her lips. Ah, this was when I understood. This wasn't the answer that she wanted. She wasn't here for the excuses. She wasn't here for an apology either. "I'm fine." Eventually nodding my head, I leaned my head back against the wall. "I'm doing okay." I desperately wanted to say those words, but the moment I tried, I found something blocking my mouth. I tried again, but "I'm doing fine." Yet again I struggled to get the words out. As if something was preventing me from saying them, I found myself unable to utter them at all. Why couldn't I say them? Slowly lifting my head to stare at Delilah and meeting her gaze, I opened my mouth to once again say the words, but as I did, I noticed something. My lips. Why were they trembling? Ah shit. I closed my eyes, feeling a sudden urge to laugh. I was an emotive mage. One of the best in the entire world. I was a person capable of manipulating the emotions of a person to the point where they could lose sight of themselves. I was also more knowledgeable about emotions than most people. I was a being that was supposed to have utter control of his own emotions. Someone that shouldn't be easily influenced by them. And yet, are you okay, Lazarus? Why in the world was I struggling to keep my emotions in check? Why in the world was I incapable of stopping the pain that was grabbing at my chest? Why in the world was I unable to stop the anger from drawing up from inside my mind? Why in the world? It all paused the moment I turned to look at her gaze once more. She hadn't spoken a single word since the start. The entire time she just looked at me. However, despite her silence, it felt as though she knew everything. As if I couldn't hide anything under her gaze, and the feeling made the pain that was invading my chest even more pronounced. In the end, lowering my head, I mumbled, "You win." I closed my eyes, leaning back against the wall as I mumbled, "I am not fine." Chapter 689. I guess so, too. Chapter 689. I guess so, too. The moment the words came out of my mouth, it felt as though a massive boulder had been pressed against my chest. Was I fine? I never really thought about the question before. No, it was more like I never had the time to properly think about the question. There was simply no time for me to think about myself. I had to train. I had to look for Noelle. I had to go to the mirror dimension. I had to solve a situation. I had a lot of things to do, be it in this world and in my previous world. When was the last time that I properly took care of myself? I tried to think about it, but the more I tried, the more I came to realize that nothing really came to mind. Back on Earth, following my parents' death, my life simply revolved around Noelle. All I could think about was how to make sure that Noelle lived a good life. Education, health, diet, everything. I took all sorts of jobs and did things that I didn't want to do in order to fill in for my parents' jobs. In that time, I never took care of myself. And that was probably what caused my death. Or at least that was how it was supposed to be. Now, I wasn't even so sure how I had actually died. Nonetheless, even as I arrived in this world, my life revolved around Noelle and getting back to him. In order to become stronger, I put myself through a lot of pain and suffering. I didn't mind the pain. I was used to the pain. And that was probably the first sign. In the end, be it past, present, or future, nothing really changed. I simply didn't care enough about myself. I tried but didn't. But it wasn't like I could just go around and say that I wasn't okay. Who even did that? Sometimes, a few simple words turn out to be the hardest thing someone could say. But what did it matter if I wasn't okay? What did it matter if I was struggling? At the end of the day, I didn't have the time to think about myself. And so, slowly lifting my head, I nodded in the silence, staring towards the pair of obsidian black eyes that stared squarely at me. Yes, I am not okay. But I will be fine. Because I had to be. The silence that followed my words felt suffocating. And yet, I was unbothered by the silence as I stared straight into her eyes. Even now, she refused to say a single thing. She was just standing there, looking at me. Is she not going to say anything? Is she just going to stand there and stare at me? I'd rather she say something. Why isn't she saying anything? My thoughts started to spiral as I continued to feel her gaze. I was at a complete loss. Why was she not saying anything? Already, do you two know each other? It was right in that moment that a certain voice spoke, and I turned my head to see, and staring in our direction with a weird expression. Anaz was also sporting a similar expression as they looked between the two of us. Well, I looked at Delilah before eventually nodding. Yes, you can say that. Although the two already seemed to have gotten an idea due to our conversation, the moment I confirmed it to them, their expressions changed quite a bit. However, it was also in that moment that I found Delilah's attention turning towards them, and a sudden chill swept through the air as she settled her gaze over to them. Or more specifically, why is she looking at her like that? For some reason, the atmosphere felt cold. I wasn't the only one who felt this way, and looked like she was experiencing all sorts of things. Seeing the two of them, I was left momentarily confused. Does she hold a grudge against Anne? Why? Wait. However, before I could figure out the reason for Delilah's sudden change in attitude, I saw and raised both of her hands as she looked at Delilah. She then turned her attention towards me. Oh? I think I understand what is going on. She did? Looking at her and noticing the subtle trembling of her body, I saw her suddenly glare at me as I cocked my head in confusion. What sort of... I have someone that I like. Oh? Question marks popped on top of my head and Anaz's. It was clear that we were both confused. She had someone she liked? Well, maybe. We didn't really bother asking her. It wouldn't be strange if that were the case. But what did that have to do with the situation? It's this guy. And placed her hand on top of Anaz's head, and the atmosphere froze. The question marks multiplied, and Anaz's face seemed to lose all sorts of pigmentation. At the same time, and looked my way. I have no interest in the merchant. The circumstances back then were because of his skill. I blinked my eyes, my mind churning as I dug through Lazarus's memories. It was also then that my eyes slowly started to widen as realization dawned on me. Oh shit. My heart sank as I looked at Delilah, whose single point of focus was Anne and the frozen Anaz. In the end, she still didn't say anything as she just stared at the two of them. For whatever reason, her mouth didn't appear to be working today. And yet just her gaze alone was enough to make us understand what she meant and started trembling further. I could see from the expression she was making that she was screaming things like, "You believe me, right? I really don't have anything to do with this. Please believe me." However, even as a few seconds passed, nothing happened as Delilah remained rooted where she was, her gaze hovering over Anne. In the end, clenching her teeth and pulled Anaz's head back and brought her head down, smacking her lips against his. Color quickly returned to Anaz's face as his eyes shot open. I stared in shock, eyes wide and lips parted, barely able to process what I was witnessing. Felt unreal. Like my mind refused to accept it. As the agonizing seconds crawled by and finally pulled her head back and released Anaz. His body crumpled to the floor, limp and lifeless like a puppet with its strings severed. Thud. Lying on the floor, he opened and closed his mouth repeatedly. Like a fish that was out of the water. I wanted to react the same way, but as I slowly pulled my head up, I saw and slowly wipe her mouth as she looked at Delilah. See? The two of us really love each other. Her face was incredibly red as she spoke. Delilah stared at Anne for a few good moments before pulling her head away and turning her attention back towards me. Could only force a smile. I've seen them do this a lot. Anaz's body twitched on the ground. He probably heard me but was too stunned to even do anything. Not that he could even if he wanted to. I do love him a lot, haha. And scratched the back of her head as she looked at me, her expression containing all sorts of emotions. Mostly she looked like she was still scared shitless. Couldn't blame her. I was just as scared of her. In silence Delilah's gaze slowly hovered towards Inez and then and again. I stared at her in stunned silence for a long moment, until without warning she turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes locked onto mine as she pressed a hand gently over her lips then slowly pursed them. Oh! My nose twitched for a brief moment, feeling her actions were a little weird. But then, as if she had had enough, Delilah slowly turned away and started to move into the crowd behind her. In the end, staring at her retreating figure, I slumped down on the chair behind me as I wiped the cold sweat that had accumulated on my forehead. Fuck, why do I feel way more tired than when I fought against Exahurl? While it was technically Lazarus who fought, the mental toll and exhaustion were still on me. I felt way more drained by her mere presence than the fight I recently had, and as I took a couple of breaths I felt a pair of emerald eyes stare directly at me. You! It was Anne. Before I knew it, she was now standing in front of me, her face hovering right before me as she looked back toward Delilah's retreating figure. What's your relationship with her? No! And shook her head, mumbling things like, it's obvious enough the relationship is not normal. There's no way she would have reacted like that otherwise. In the end, looking at me, she asked, was that your companion? What? I frowned, looking at her. Companion? What sort of nonsense was this? While it was true that I liked her, our relationship was quite complicated. In fact, as of right now, that was probably the furthest thing from the truth. I wasn't even sure if she was fine with me. In fact, she might even hate me. The fact that she didn't say anything the entire time was proof of this, and just as I was about to answer, I raised my head to stare at the distant figure, who for some reason appeared to pause. She was listening, wasn't she? In that case, she probably wanted to know my answer too. I clenched my teeth, staring at her back, and I leaned back on the chair and muttered, I guess so. By the time I looked towards the distance again, she was gone. Chapter 690. I guess so, 3. Chapter 690. I guess so, 3. Moments leading up to the situation. What's going on? It all happened out of nowhere. It was right when they had just finished counting their money and were about to close up the stall. Right at that moment, a figure appeared before them. Just one look at her was enough to take Inez's breath away. He had never seen anyone so impossibly perfect. Her face was delicately sculpted, every feature refined to utter perfection. Her long, lustrous black hair cascaded down like silk, and her eyes, those eyes were as deep and unfathomable as the abyss itself. But that wasn't all. Forgetting all about her appearance, Inez became acutely aware of the identity of the person that stood before him, and his entire body froze on the spot. She was the same person who had taken care of Exahurl. Recalling the moments when she fought against the beast and even managed to suppress it up to a certain point, Inez felt cold sweat trickling down the side of his face. Why in the world was she here? He didn't have to wait long to get his answer as he saw her look in Lazarus's direction. Shit! Inez was scared shitless. At first he thought that Lazarus had in his own way offended her. Or even worse, she had somehow been swindled by him. If that were to be the case, then Inez was prepared to immediately make a run for it. While she was strong, Inez didn't believe for one second that with his skill Lazarus wouldn't be able to swindle her. He was that much of a swindler. But then, he was quick to realize that something was amiss with the situation. Alternating his gaze between the two, he immediately understood that his previous assumption was different. The two of them, they know each other? He tried to dismiss the thought at first, but staring at the two, Inez felt more and more sure of his assumption until he heard Lazarus's words. As if some sort of cold water had been poured onto his mind, Inez stood rooted on the spot as his eyes slowly started to widen. He really knows her. He wasn't the only one shocked, and also seemed equally shocked as they stared at each other. Inez had always been wondering about Lazarus's real identity. He had always been aware of the fact that it wasn't his real identity and that he had some sort of hidden background. How else would he be able to provide such goods? However, never in his wildest dreams did Inez think that Lazarus's background was like this. If the woman was truly on his side, then Lazarus must have been from some sort of major organization. At least this was what Inez thought at first. However, looking closer at the two of them, Inez felt that something was amiss between the two. The air between them, it was rather cold. Maybe they aren't on good terms? He silently licked his lips while turning his attention towards Anne, who stared at the two with a frown. She seemed to be sharing different thoughts from his. However, even under Inez's pleading gaze, she didn't answer. Though the black-haired woman whose very presence seemed to eclipse everything around her carried an aura of absolute coldness and could see it clearly. There was nothing cold in the way she looked at Lazarus. Her gaze as intense as it was held something far more complex, something closer to affection. Yes, I don't believe they are on bad terms, and whispered silently to Inez, causing him to be confused, and could see at a glance that the story between Lazarus and the woman was complicated. In fact, she could tell that there was a certain something within the relationship as her lips pursed together. A thought struck her in that moment. That would explain his weird actions and connections. If the two of them knew each other, then Lazarus's mysterious background could finally be explained. Or at least to some extent. And was still unaware of the woman's background. However, at a glance she could tell that she wasn't from these areas. Someone as powerful as her was sure to have made a name for herself. The real question was, what sort of relationship did she and Lazarus have? And didn't have to wait long to get her answer as she suddenly felt the woman's icy gaze on her. At first she was confused, shocked, and even scared. But then seeing her subtly look at Lazarus as she looked at her with that gaze, realization quickly struck, and as she quickly got to work and tried to clear up whatever misunderstanding existed. Thud. Even as Inez fell to the floor at a complete loss with his eyes swirling around and remained tense as she looked at the woman. It was only a guess and she wasn't sure if it was going to work, but the moment she let go of Inez it felt as though she felt subtle hints of relief in the woman's cold and indifferent face as she touched her lips. In the end, she never once spoke a word, leaving as fast as she came. It was only after the woman had walked far enough away that, and finally turned to Lazarus, her voice low as she asked about his relationship with her. But the moment he replied with a hesitant "I guess," and felt the ground shift beneath her like the entire world had suddenly turned upside down. Even Inez couldn't help but snap out of whatever state he was in as he looked at Lazarus with a complicated expression. In the end, the reason why you posed yourself as a merchant is because of some domestic dispute with your girlfriend? Eh? Julian's face twitched for a brief moment. His usually composed expression showed signs of cracking as his lips twitched. He wanted to argue but found that he couldn't. He eventually shook his head. It's not that simple. But it's not like it doesn't exist. Well, so it does. Julian looked at Inez for a short moment before lowering his head. He seemed to have given up on arguing, which wasn't far from the truth. In his mind, the previous scene replayed in his mind over and over again as he pursed his lips together, trying his best to keep himself composed. In the end, did anything change? He was extremely confused. The entire time Delilah hadn't said a single word. Did she forgive him? Did she hate him? What was going to happen? Julian's thoughts swirled in all sorts of directions as he struggled to grasp what Delilah's intentions were. However, it was in the midst of his confusion that he felt his chest throb, and when he looked down in the direction of the pain, he was surprised to see something within his breast pocket. What? Confused, Julian reached out for his pocket only to pull out a warm piece of paper. His eyes widened slightly. When in the world? No, wait. It must have been during the time when she smacked me back. Realization quickly dawned on him as he opened the paper and read the message. We will be leaving in 2 days. That was all the message said. It had no location, no exact time. Just read that. Julian covered his forehead. What am I supposed to do with this piece of information? Was she telling him to come with them? Or was she just telling him that they were going to leave then? Julian was an even greater loss than he was before. In the end, the only thing he could do was sigh while blankly staring at the gray sky above. All sorts of thoughts crossed his mind in that moment, but eventually with a sigh his expression relaxed. Thinking about it, I don't have any more reason to stay in this place anymore. I've achieved everything that I wanted to achieve. I think it's time that I leave. Lifting his head, Julian stared in the direction of Inez and Anne, and his gaze flickered for a brief moment. It was also time for him to say goodbye. A lone figure moved serenely through the crowd that filled the cobblestone streets. Like a passing breeze, her presence went unnoticed, her black hair drifting softly with every step that she took. The world appeared to have completely lost her presence. Whenever someone approached, they instinctively stepped aside, completely unaware of her presence, as if guided by something invisible. All the while she stood still, calmly surveying her surroundings as the world around her moved. She took in the scene before her. From the numerous stalls to the people who haggled by the stalls. None of it escaped her sight as she calmly observed everything. Eventually, however, her steps came to a stop as the people started to move around her. Staring at everything that was around her, Delilah's face fluctuated faintly. Her thoughts drifted towards a certain man. He looked different than he did in the past. From his facial structure to appearance. He was almost unrecognizable. However, she distinctly remembered seeing him in the past. It was during the time when the head of the Ivinus household came to visit the academy. He was there all along. Delilah's emotions were complicated as her thoughts paused there. However, that didn't last for long as her mind soon drifted towards the events from a moment prior. She may not have been able to tell then, but she was able to tell now. Even though he looked different, he acted the same. From his flustered expression to the way he sometimes hesitated to look at her to the times he would scratch the side of his face. It was him. Delilah was certain. And in all honesty, she wanted to say something to him. She had never planned to stay quiet, but seeing his flustered expression, Delilah couldn't help but maintain her expression. That seemed to make him even more flustered as he tried to explain himself. He started rambling about a lot of things, and Delilah could see that if she didn't do anything he wouldn't stop. So she did. He looked even more flustered. And that look. Delilah couldn't help but feel amused by it. In the end, however, she knew that things wouldn't progress much from that point. That was why she left. Now standing in the middle of the crowd, Delilah slowly brought her hand to her lips as a certain conversation flowed in her mind. Was that your companion? I guess so. Unconsciously, her lips slowly curled up as her figure faded from within the crowd. His words. Not hers. Chapter 691. Goodbye 1. Chapter 691. Goodbye 1. I've managed to pay off everything. It didn't really cost much and we still have a lot of money. Stepping out of the inn where we were staying and casually tossed the bag of coins in her hand, the clinking sound echoing in the air as several people glanced her way. She paused mid-step, then turned to glance at Anaz, who stood a short distance away. His face was still dazed, as if his thoughts hadn't yet caught up with everything that had happened. She clicked her tongue and mumbled, "Get over it." Looking at Anaz, I felt a little bit of pity for him. How could he get over it so quickly? A couple of days had passed since the incident, and from time to time Anaz would suddenly stop before looking at the air with the same dazed expression. This annoyed and to no end as she continuously clicked her tongue. I'm also a victim. In the end, ignoring him, she turned to look at me. What next? What next? Indeed, what next? My job here was done. There was nothing else left for me to do. I could finally go back. But, looking around and staring in the direction of Anaz and I could only quietly sigh. I could tell at a glance that the two of them were probably not going to follow me back to the Empire. I will probably be heading back. The area around us paused for a moment as Anaz snapped out of his daze. Eventually, however, and spoke. With that partner of yours? Air. Staring at Anne's face and seeing the subtle smirk on her face, I could only force out a smile. Yes. Anne's lips curled a little more, but she held back whatever words were forming. In the end, she simply lifted her head, her gaze drifting up to the dull gray sky that loomed above. Her expression turned a little complex. I'm not sure what I'll do. I think I'll probably use my cut to repair the ship and hire more crew members for my ship. We did lose quite a bit of them during the entire situation. Even though we were further away from Exahurl, several of my crewmates were still affected. So you'll still be a pirate? But of course. Anne answered with a matter-of-fact expression. It's the most lucrative job out there, and with both Silas and another one of the 7 lords gone, a new space opened up. There's a lot of money to be made and... well, this is all that I pretty much know how to do. I like being a pirate. I see. I couldn't argue with her words. After spending so much time with her and the crew as Lazarus, I knew just how deeply she cared for them and how much she loved the sea. It was a part of her. Expecting her to do anything else would have felt wrong. Unnatural even. Then what about you? Slowly turning my head, I looked at Anaz, who seemed to have snapped out of it, his eyes eventually turning towards a tall spire in the distance. His face turned complicated. I've actually been contacted by the members of the church. They've offered me a good position there. Oh, yes, that made sense. While Anaz no longer seemed obsessed with the church, he still had attachments to it. If he wanted to stay in the mirror dimension, this would probably be the best thing for him. Are you going to take it? I've already accepted it. I opened my mouth but found the words stripped away. In the end, I just smiled. As expected, both of them want to stay here. I had mixed feelings about this. Having spent quite a bit of time with them, I had grown attached to the two of them. However, I could not force them to come with me. Furthermore, the person that whom the two of them were more attached was Lazarus, not me. The lingering feelings of Lazarus still remained with me, and to him the two of them were the two people who had influenced his life the most. They were the only two people that Lazarus could call friends in his small yet impactful life. And for that reason, I didn't insist or say anything more. To Lazarus, they were his everything, but to me they were merely passing winds that I would eventually have to part with. It was time for me to say goodbye. I guess it looks like the two of you have everything sorted. Yeah. We do. An awkward silence filled the space as we stood staring at each other. In the end, it was Anaz who broke the silence. I can tell that you don't belong here. You should also be leaving by today, right? Yeah. I see. Anaz nodded, faintly looking at Anne, who pursed her lips. Then, with a thin smile on his lips, Anaz clenched his fist. Hell yeah. Anaz suddenly shouted at the top of his lungs, his face flushed red with excitement. Eh? Huh. Hold on. What was happening? Staring at the suddenly excited Anaz, I was left at a total loss for words. Why was he shouting? No, why did he look so excited? I didn't need to wait long to get my answer as Anaz's smile grew wide and he pointed at me. Do you have any idea of how much I've suffered because of you, eh? Not only did you drag me all across to the remnant south, but I've also been targeted by a primordial ranked being, was chased by one of the 7 lords, and even nearly died a couple of times. Now that you're gone, I'm finally free. Anaz suddenly started cackling like crazy, almost to the point where he sounded like Kira. Kakaka. My lip twitched at the sight as I turned to look at Anne, who blinked her eyes slowly before bringing her finger to her lips. Now that I think about it, you're right. How much did the two of us suffer? She sounded quite emotional. In fact, it looked like she was choking up. The fuck? We're free. We're finally free. Without warning, they wrapped themselves in a tight embrace, murmuring the same words over and over like some sort of broken record. Watching them, my face crumpled up and I couldn't help but click my tongue again and again. Where was the emotional farewell that I had planned? Forget it. Fuck them. Flipping them off, I turned around and waved my hand in annoyance. Whatever. You're free. Be happy now that I'm gone. TSK. He's leaving. Ha ha ha. The two of them continued to laugh as I marched ahead, entering the crowd in the distance. I continued to walk forward like that until their voices completely faded from my ears and finally came to a stop. That was when I suddenly smiled and shook my head. Those two. I sighed. I guess this type of goodbye isn't so bad after all. Looking up at the sky once more, I touched my face before eventually turning to face a different direction. Finally, it was time for me to go back. He's gone. Yup. He's gone. Staring in the direction of where Lazarus had disappeared, the expressions of joy on both and Ananaz's faces faded. From the start, neither of the two was actually happy about him leaving. Especially Anaz, who looked in the direction where Lazarus had left with a complicated expression. Although they hadn't known each other for very long, his life had changed drastically since meeting him. While it was true that he had encountered all sorts of trouble and even died multiple times, it was also true that he had grown a lot since then. With Exahurl gone, Anaz remembered everything. He remembered everything that happened in the sinful strait and the words that Lazarus had once told him. Grow. Indeed, he had to grow. He couldn't remain like he was in the past. As such, he had to let go of Lazarus. Anaz understood more than ever that he couldn't allow himself to worship others or follow them. He had to focus on himself and himself only. The reason why he decided to accept the church's offer wasn't because he was still obsessed with them. The reason was that this was the path that Anaz realized would benefit him the most in his growth. He knew that he could climb higher, and becoming a Luminarch was probably not going to be hard anymore. But he wasn't satisfied with that anymore. Anaz wanted to grow even further. He wanted to grow to the point where he could be like the saint and help those who were once like him. It was a silly goal, but it was at least a goal. He no longer wanted to be in the church for the goddess. He wanted to be there to help those who needed to grow, just like how Lazarus had once helped him. This was his goal, and he planned on fulfilling it. Anaz would have never thought he'd act and think like this in the past, but all the experiences had changed him to become who he was today. And for that he was thankful. But on a different note, "Hey!" A soft voice whispered to his ear, prompting Anaz to snap out of his thoughts as his head turned to meet a pair of emerald eyes that were right next to his face. He blinked several times, then looked down, suddenly aware of the position he was in. His mouth hung open in shock as a faint imaginary steam began to rise from his head, curling upward like smoke from a smoldering fire. Puff. As if something had exploded, his mind turned blank, and he finally let go of and who covered her forehead while staring at him. Wah! That air. But at the same time she couldn't help but find her lips slowly pulling up into a smile. He looked completely different from a moment ago when he looked all serious and pensive. Staring at his dazed expression and red face, for some reason she found him to be rather cute. But with that being said, raising her head and looking around, the smile faded from her face as she snapped her fingers in front of his face. Hey, snap out of it. People are looking. Snap. Snap. However, regardless of what she did, Anaz wouldn't budge. In the end, An's face contorted. He was cute but also quite stupid. What was she going to do with him? Chapter 692. Goodbye. 2. I can't wait to get out of this place. Same. The heat. It's really starting to get to me. Well, it's not much different in the Empire. As far as I'm concerned, summer is just about starting. If you think this heat is bad, wait until we get back. It may be hot here, but at least it's dry. Over there? It's as humid as it can get. Groans rippled through the crowd as several cadets visibly winced, their expressions twisting in discomfort. Some even looked around with a change in expression, as if thinking this place wasn't that bad after all. Thinking about it, he isn't here, so it might not be too bad if we stay here any longer. Oh, you're right. By he, they were referring to Julian. Not everyone was aware of his death, and as such they still took their time to mention his jinx-like abilities and how whenever he was present they all ended up suffering. Thinking about it, our trip was actually quite bad. We encountered quite a few things. Maybe he's not as much of a jinx as we previously made him out to be. You have a point. The cadets nodded in silence, feeling that the trip had indeed been quite bad even without him being present. In that sense, perhaps they were being overly critical of him. Listening in on their conversation, Leon tried his best to hide his smile. If only they knew. Why are you smiling? Perhaps not doing a very good job at hiding his smile, or because she was rather observant, Evelyn was quick to point out his actions, prompting several people to turn in Leon's direction. HM? Looking at Evelyn, he feigned ignorance while raising his brow. I was just happy that we were about to go back. I'm also getting tired of this place. Is that so? Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She didn't look convinced at all. In fact, the others were also not convinced. This was because he was usually the guy who would stop the conversations regarding Julian. Last they recalled, he was the one who had thrown most of the cadets out of the window during that incident. Something felt a little off, but they couldn't quite explain it. Watching them behave like that, Leon was left speechless. He opened his mouth, slightly searching for something to say, but in the end he stayed quiet and simply glanced around instead. They were standing in a quieter, more remote part of the city. The area was nearly empty, the usual crowd nowhere in sight. Buildings rose on either side, enclosing what looked like a small plaza. A few benches lined the edges, and at the center stood a solitary sculpture, its obsidian finish gleaming under the scorching white sun. Currently they were waiting for the Chancellor to arrive. She had told them in advance to wait for her here. Knowing that she was the only person who could bring them away, they could only comply. Oh, by the way, did any of you get any souvenirs or bones? I've managed to buy myself quite a few. I think if we end up selling them in the Empire, I'll make a good amount of money. It was surprisingly Kira who talked as she raised her hand to show a small bag that seemed to be filled to the brim with items. Aoife raised her brow. Since when did you have so much money? Wait, don't tell me. A look of shock crossed Aoife's features. What? You? Don't tell me that you sold your body? Oh no. Kira's lips twitched, her entire expression twitching alongside her lips. With one glance one could see that she was really struggling to remain composed. And that was the truth. Be it Aoife or Evelyn, the two of them had spent a major part of the trip trying to get her to break her character. At first they did it because they missed the old Kira, but then it just became their source of entertainment. Even the way they addressed her changed to boring Kira. The fact that Kira had yet to break showed just how committed she was. TSK? Still no reaction? And Kira also liked the expressions that Aoife and Evelyn made whenever they failed to make her break character. It was just as she was about to open her mouth to reply that a figure materialized in front of them, her long lustrous black hair swaying faintly as her obsidian eyes locked onto them. Immediately all noise ceased as all eyes fell on the Chancellor, who quietly looked at them before settling her gaze towards Aoife. Everyone is present, Chancellor. There is not a single person missing. As the one responsible for the third years, it was only natural that she handled the roll call. Because of that, she knew with certainty that everyone was present. Delilah nodded quietly, her thoughts unknown, as she turned her head towards the distance, her brows lightly furrowed. The surroundings turned quiet once more as all the cadets looked at her, waiting for her to do something. What's going on? Is something happening? Why are we not leaving yet? Are we waiting for someone? Are we about to get ambushed? All sorts of whispers and murmurs filled the small plaza as the cadets looked at each other in confusion. Even Aoife and the others were left confused by the sudden delay. What the hell is happening? How should I know? The only one that had an inkling of the situation was Leon, who couldn't help but raise his brow in surprise. Could it be? Sure enough, not long after the thoughts entered his mind, a certain figure appeared in the distance. Leon was the first one to notice as he turned in the direction of the figure, his lips slowly pulling into a smile as Delilah's gaze also fell on him. The frown that had been marring her features slowly settled and her usually stoic expression returned. However, if one looked closely, they'd notice a faint curling of her lips as she turned her head to look away. Hey Leon, Evelyn called out, suddenly brushing a strand of her purple hair behind her ear as she turned toward him. Do you have any idea what's going on? Because Aoife is being pretty useless right now. Hey, it's true though. Evelyn shrugged, giving Aoife a look that seemed to say no lies were told here. Aoife was just about to snap back with a retort when her eyes suddenly followed Leon's gaze, and then she saw it. In an instant her expression shifted. No, it didn't just shift. Her face drained of all color, going pale as chalk. It was the kind of look someone had when they saw something they were never meant to, like she had just seen a ghost. This sudden change confused Evelyn. What's up with you? Why? However, she was quick to realize the reason for the change as her face also showed similar changes. That. Evelyn started to stutter the words, seemingly not getting out. You two can stop. I'm not falling for it. Looking at them, Kira rolled her eyes. She could see what they were trying to do from miles away. This was probably going to be another annoying trick to piss her off. However, her thoughts changed rather quickly as she noticed that Aoife and Evelyn weren't the only ones who were showing similar looks. Kaylee and Amel, and even the usually cold Caius, started showing similar expressions of shock as they stared in the same direction as everyone. Is everyone in it together? What's going on? Unable to hold her curiosity any longer, Kira finally turned her head, and it was in the exact moment that she turned her head that her eyes locked onto a figure she was all too familiar with. With a face that was evenly proportioned on all sides and skin that was devoid of any blemishes, he looked no inferior to Leon. His eyes were sharp and his dark hair swayed gently with each step that he took. However, the most striking feature of his was his deep hazel eyes that seemed to arrogantly look down on anything they set their eyes on. It was as if all noise had been stripped away from the surroundings as all eyes fell on the figure that they hadn't seen in so long. And then, just as the silence seemed to stretch for an eternity, Julian raised his hand, greeting everyone as though he had just come back from a small trip. "How have you all been?" Silence. Julian's words were met with silence as all eyes remained trained on him. Some were more shocked than others, while others were at a complete loss. But in the end, swoosh! A shadow blurred and a figure appeared before Julian, her hands outstretched before latching onto him. Thud! The two of them fell onto the ground as Julian looked at Kira in surprise. She actually cared this much about him? He was at a loss. "I'll kill you." "Oh." But it soon became clear to him that he was overthinking as he felt a pair of hands latched onto his throat. "Fucker, you're supposed to be dead. I'll kill you." Kira didn't bother lowering her voice. She spoke clearly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The force behind her words cut through the silence, and several people snapped out of their stupor, all at once blinking as if suddenly yanked back to reality. Flustered, Julian tried to speak. "Wait, hold on. He didn't even get a few more words out until another figure appeared, dashing in his direction before jumping next to Kira and latching onto his throat as well. "Let me help." "Aoife?" "Me too." "Evelyn?" "Same." "Caius?" Before Julian knew it, a crowd had formed around him, all of whom looked incredibly angry at him as they grabbed onto his throat and tried to strangle him. Not expecting such a reaction, Julian desperately looked around before settling his gaze onto Leon, who stared at him in silence. "Help me." Leon eventually smiled, taking a step forward as he moved towards Julian. Julian's eyes lit up as soon as he saw Leon move. As expected of my knight. He wasn't useless after all. If you want to strangle him, at least put some effort into it. How about we have the body users do the strangling while the mages keep him sealed? Julian's eyes widened upon hearing his words. However, Leon didn't care at all as he continued to give out orders. "Make sure when you strangle him you block his airways. It's important that he can't breathe." Chapter 693. Return to Empire 1. Chapter 693. Return to Empire 1. Ivina's household. Moonlight poured into the quiet office, casting a pale glow across the room. A lone figure sat by the window, gently twirling a wine cup between his fingers. Noel's eyes were locked on the distant moon, reflecting its pale glow in his eyes. Whatever thoughts stirred behind that gaze remained his alone. Eventually, he drew his gaze away from the window and lifted the cup to his lips. The rich taste of the wine lingered on his tongue as he closed his eyes, savoring the moment in silence. He didn't particularly like wine or alcohol. He drank not because of taste but out of necessity. With his heart missing, he lived every day in pain. Some days he could bear the pain, but there were other days when the pain was simply too much for him. This was such a day. From time to time, Noel's body would twitch as he tried his best to suppress the pain. However, as hard as he could, the pain continued to linger, clawing at his chest and mind continuously. It was only when he drank the wine that he was able to somewhat forget the pain, as his usually stoic face showed signs of melting. Taking another sip of the wine, Noel lowered his head to stare at his own reflection. Towards the reflection that displayed a face that wasn't his own. He should be done by now. It had been quite a while since Emmett had gone to the mirror dimension, and according to his estimates, if nothing went wrong, he should have been able to collect the eye. Not only that, but he should have also learned about the outer beings. A small smile played on his lips as he thought about Emmett while his reflection rippled. "I bet he's probably angry at me for not telling him everything." Noel could practically imagine Emmett cursing at him for not telling him everything and stringing him along. Noel certainly could have told him everything, but where was the fun in that? It was much better to show him than to tell him. Either way, all of it won't matter once he gets his true memories back. It wouldn't be long before that happened. Swoosh! Right then, a sudden shift occurred, and the curtains billowed as a strong wind suddenly swept into the room despite the closed windows. Unfazed by the strange occurrence, Noel slowly lifted his head and stared at the figure that had just appeared before him. It was as if the sun had descended before him, flooding the surroundings in an overwhelming radiant light. It was overwhelming enough to cause any regular person to go blind. And yet Noel didn't seem to be affected at all by the light. But was that truly the case? Upon closer look, his eyes shifted from light blue to normal and back again, continuously repairing themselves under the bright light, which gradually faded to reveal the silhouette of a figure whose features remained hidden. Noel took a sip of his wine as he stared at the figure before him. "I take it that he's managed to collect the eye." "He has," a soft voice replied to him shortly after. "Not only that, but he was also able to almost take down a primordial ranked being. I was prepared to step in at any moment considering how I owe you, but he was able to take care of the matter before I even had the chance to step in. He's impressive." "Yes, he is." Noel took another sip of his wine, trying his best to hide the smile that threatened to form at any given second. So she still is unaware of his real identity. This was a good thing. Noel never planned on revealing it considering how he still didn't trust this woman. In fact, he didn't trust any of the other gods. He is now leaving the remnant south. He should be back to you soon. This is all that I needed to say. Oh, and a powerful woman came in the end. She was the one who actually took care of the primordial ranked being. Powerful woman? Noel's hand paused, his brow raising up as he looked at Panthea. He was unaware of this part. Yes. Panthea nodded quietly, her gaze falling on Noel as she described to him her appearance and power. It didn't take long for Noel to understand the situation as he closed his eyes and pursed his lips. In the end, you couldn't help yourself, huh? Noel didn't know what to do with his brother. On one hand, he was annoyed given how he had instructed him to remain quiet. On the other hand, he also understood why he did it. It wasn't even because he was too emotional. Knowing his brother best, Emmett most likely gave hints about himself as a sort of backup plan if he ended up losing himself in his own act. Given how he was pursuing the 5th level of emotive magic, Noel was aware of the challenges that he had to take in order to reach such a level. This was why Noel wasn't too angry. In the end, he owed his brother too much to be angry. Thankfully, the situation was still manageable. But on a different note, who would have thought my cold brother of all people would have a woman be his backup plan in case he lost himself in his own act? Noel suddenly felt that the situation was quite interesting. Of course, it was only a fleeting thought as he looked at Panthea once more. She was currently staring at him in silence, her expression impossible to read under the bright glow that enveloped her. In the end, her voice drifted into the room not long after. How is the situation with Torin? He's currently busy handling other matters. He won't be making any major moves in the upcoming days. However, I can't guarantee that it will remain like this for long. Thinking about Torin, Noel's heart sank. The situation within the Church of Heraclius was currently quite dire. All sorts of people were flocking to the area demanding a new saint candidate following several incidents that occurred involving him. The backlash had gotten so bad that even the Round Table had no choice but to step in. Everything, of course, was a result of Torin's actions. But at the same time, he also most likely figured out the truth behind the incident or was close to it. He's now probably waiting for the saint of the church to fully absorb the blood before taking it for himself and then looking for Emmett. Noel understood that they didn't have much time. From the moment Emmett came back, they'd have to make preparations for Torin's arrival. Thinking about what was about to come, Noel closed his eyes for a brief moment before looking at Panthea once more. He quietly stood up as he did so, placing the wine cup by the side. Considering how you've helped me out this time, we can consider our debt repaid. Okay. Panthea merely nodded her head at the statement. This was all that she wanted to hear. In that case, I shall take my leave. Gradually her figure started to fade as the bright glow that once enveloped the room started to dim. However, right as she was about to leave, she recalled something and stopped. I advise you not to look for your heart. As far as I'm aware, Ivanth appears to be guarding it. You'll have an incredibly hard time getting it back if it's truly him who is guarding the heart. The moment the word reached Noel's ears, her figure vanished completely, leaving the room in total silence as he stood frozen in place. Eventually his fists clenched together tightly as his expression threatened to change. However, after a few deep breaths, he regained his composure, his expression settling into a cold indifference as he eased back into his seat. Tap, tap, tap. His fingers drummed across the table as his eyes flickered. Ivanth! Help! Looking around in despair, I had a hard time breathing. I could see hands reaching out from my throat in all directions, and when I turned to look at Leon, instead of helping me, he appeared to be giving them tips on how to strangle me. Audacious knight! Traitorous bastard! I should have sold you when I had the chance. Leon merely stared at me, his lips pulling into a soft smile as he pushed several cadets my way. At the same time, I saw him mouth something like, I'm nothing but a failure, right? In that case, what does it matter if I do this? He continued to push people my way as I started to despair. No wonder everything had gone bad. He was here all along. Damn it. No wonder. Fucking Jinx. Wait, what? Lifting my head up, I looked around. Who said that? Jinx? Me? I wanted to push myself to have a good talk with whoever said that. However, I couldn't quite pinpoint who said it as the number of people who were trying to assault me increased. And it also seemed like it wasn't just one person. Which bastards? Yook! Eventually I turned my head towards Delilah, who stared at me in silence. Yet again she said nothing. She just stared at me. However, just for a brief moment I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a slight curl of her lips as my eyes widened. This woman! The curl disappeared right as it appeared, but I knew what I saw as I glared at her. That probably wasn't the best decision, as I saw her brow raise and her expression cool off rather quickly. I pressed my lips tightly and turned my head away. Right, okay. Fine. Considering everything that I had done, I was going to concede just for now. But only now. By the time we came back to the EMP, "It's good that you're back." Right then a certain voice whispered into my ear and my thoughts came to an abrupt stop. Lifting my head up, I saw the others looking at me with a mix of different expressions as the strangling subsided and they all looked at me. "It's really good that you're back. It's nice. It really is good." In the end, closing my eyes, I leaned my head back. "Yeah, it's good to be back." Chapter 694. Return to Empire 2. "So you were saying that you were that guy all along?" Yes. Arriving at Virathanash before continuing our journey back to the Empire, Delilah granted us a few hours of rest. This wasn't merely due to her kindness but also because some of the cadets needed some time in order to recuperate from the long teleportation. I was generally fine, but I did feel a little nauseous. Long-distance teleportation took quite a heavy toll on a person's body. I could only imagine how big of a toll Delilah's body took. "Is she okay?" "I'm sure she's fine. She didn't show much of a reaction. But what if?" Before I knew it, I found myself worrying about her. This was something that I couldn't help. In general, these couple of hours would do good for me too. But there was still one issue. "So you're also that weird Lazarus guy who these people claim to be a merchant pirate? You became a pirate?" The sudden onslaught of questions was starting to get to me. The emotional reunion that I had expected never materialized. Rather, I was immediately strangled before suddenly being reminded of my time back when I was here. Back when I was Lazarus the merchant who somehow ended up being a pirate and a sort of legend within the city. The one who defied the light was what they called Lazarus. Just thinking about it made me wince. Wait, how do they even know all of this? Actually, thinking about it, it probably wasn't hard to know. In the end, we all managed to enter a more spacious bar where all the cadets sat around as they bombarded me with questions. Kek. Kook. Of course the topic still lingered on my pirate days. "So what did you do as a pirate? Did you go to other ships and take their loot?" "Haha, I bet that you managed to get a lot of loot." "Yeah, a lot of..." Right then everyone paused and the previous smiles suddenly faded as realization dawned on them. Staring at their reaction, I immediately got a bad feeling as I shook my head. "No, I didn't loot anything. I have my own morals." I could tell from just a glance that they were eyeing my money. But no, I wasn't going to give it to them. "Then what about all the bones you were selling not too long ago?" My lip twitched as I looked at Leon. The more I looked at him, the more useless he seemed to me. I was just about to open my mouth to say, "I should have sold you," and whatnot, but recalling the time when he insulted me in the past, I hastily shut my mouth. Right, he'll just say I overused my jokes and how I wasn't funny and all that. For clarification, I didn't. And even if I did, it didn't matter. What mattered was my delivery, and my delivery was great. At the very least, it was leagues better than Leon's. "So? You seriously didn't plunder any unlucky soul? If you don't have money, how did you manage to survive? No, how did you even get here before us?" At Aoife's sudden question, the atmosphere turned quiet. Right, how was he here before us? It makes no sense at all. Looking at everyone and seeing the confusion on their faces, I replied rather quickly. "Actually, I was on a secret mission." I had been thinking about how to explain the entire ordeal to them for a while, knowing that I was going to reunite with them eventually. The answer was simple. The Chancellor sent me on a mission to scout the area before you guys. It was part of my graduation mission. The reason why she sent me first is because as the Black Star, my evaluation is a bit different. That makes sense. Right? Why didn't I think of that? Many of the cadets bought my excuse as they all snapped up their fingers in understanding. Of course, that was merely for those who were unaware of my supposed death. Those who were aware all looked at me in silence, their gazes digging into me. I could only pretend not to see their expressions as I talked with the other cadets. However, staring at everyone who was speaking to me, asking me questions, some smiling, some laughing, I couldn't help but feel that the scene was strange. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that this would happen in my first year. I thought back to my first year in the world. Those had probably been my hardest days. During those days it felt as though the entire world was against me and I was fighting against it in order to survive. I shut everything around me and just focused on myself. But then, somewhere sometime, everything changed. The cadets no longer appeared scared of me. I was also not scared or against interacting with them. Looking at the comfortable smiles as I talked to them, I realized just how much had changed since the first year. Was it them who changed, or was it me? Maybe it's both. Whatever the case was, this was kind of nice. But while the atmosphere was nice and all, it still ended up tiring me out by the time the second hour clocked in. Feeling a headache starting to form, I excused myself and went out of the bar, wandering about the city that I had once lived in for a bit of time. Memories of the time I was Lazarus resurfaced in my mind as I walked around the bazaar, now a lot quieter than before, until I eventually came to a stop in front of a familiar place. This was where I worked for a while. I called it the Grey Chamber Merchant Group. I sold a lot of things. So you did end up making a lot of money. I lost it all. Feeling my lips pull up, I turned around to see a pair of gray eyes staring directly at me. While his appearance was a little different since we were outside, his eyes were still the same, and so was his voice. I take it that you're here because you're not satisfied with the answer I previously gave? The one about you being here on a secret mission. Ah, I let out a soft laugh. I take it that I'm right. Well, this didn't surprise me. The excuse wasn't exactly the greatest, and knowing Leon, he was probably curious as to why I had to fake my own death. I thought about telling him the truth, but I don't know, Leon. Yeah. I thought back to how his name was Noel inverted and everything that Noel had done to him in the past. From teaching him to guiding him to some extent. I knew that Noel wouldn't simply name him Leon and guide him for no reason. He had plans for Leon, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Perhaps when I get back I should consider asking Noel. But whether Noel would give me an answer or not was an entirely different matter. That bastard. Nope. I'm not interested in knowing what you did. Surprisingly, Leon shook his head, prompting me to raise my brow. You aren't? No, not really. Leon scratched the side of his neck as I replied. You probably have your own reasons, and I've been quite busy recently. Life as a prince isn't as easy as one might think. Oh right. I was suddenly reminded of this guy's other identity. Right. He is a prince, isn't he? A lot of politics and attempted assassinations. Life without you was quite hectic. You can say that this trip to the mirror dimension has been one of the most relaxing times of my life. Is that so? Good for him, I guess. In that case, do you want to be my knight again? No, fuck that. There was not even a hint of hesitation in Leon's voice. That kind of hurt. It's not like I treated him badly or anything like that. Save from the occasional, I'll sell you comment, I felt that I treated him well. The one who treated him badly was the other Julian. Even if I wanted to be your knight now that my identity has been revealed, it's impossible. It'll create a mess of the Verdant Empire. The chaos will be pretty big, and Leon suddenly stopped mid-sentence, covering his mouth as he looked at me. Now that I think about it, that does sound pretty entertaining. His lip pulled up slightly as I took a step back. What the hell is going on? I thought he hadn't changed while I was gone, but he certainly did. Looking at him and seeing the expression he was making while thinking about the possible chaos his actions would bring, I started to have a bad feeling. Say, Leon looked at me, his eyes flickering. On second though, fuck that. I cut him off before he could even get his words out. You're fired. I'm not even hired. Doesn't matter. You're fired. Don't even think about it. TSK. Leon clicked his tongue, and then the two of us paused. Briefly after that we both smiled. Well, only briefly, as we both started to cringe. Never again. Yes. By the time it was all said and done, the two of us returned to the group, and we soon headed back toward the meeting spot where Delilah was waiting. The meeting spot was located a little bit off the main city, in a more desolate area near the cliff, where one could still hear the raging waters of the Crimson Sea smash against the cliff. As I stood by the group, I saw her gaze linger over everyone but me as she snapped her fingers. Is everyone ready? The moment Delilah asked the question, she was met with several nods, as some of the cadets paled, some even holding onto their stomachs. Not that Delilah seemed to care, as she suddenly raised her hand and snapped it. Snap. One by one the cadets began to fade before my eyes, disappearing right in front of me. I stared at the sight, waiting for my turn to inevitably arrive, but as the cadets faded one by one, I felt a sinking feeling. One that became glaring the moment everyone disappeared from view, leaving behind a pair of obsidian eyes staring directly at me. Splash! Splash! The crashing of the raging water against the cliff echoed louder than ever as I stared at Delilah. A question arose in my mind at that moment. To jump or not to jump? Chapter 695. Return to Empire 3. Chapter 695. Return to Empire 3. Okay, it's not too tall. Taking a step back, I looked behind me. I was currently standing by the edge of a cliff, the sound of the waves splashing behind me as I carefully analyzed the distance between me and the water. It was about 30 meters. That was pretty tall. I'll still survive. I can just slow down my fall, and once I enter the water it won't really matter since I can now breathe underwater thanks to Anne's teachings. The plan was set and I was ready to go through with it. But there was only one problem. Staring at the woman who stood opposite me and feeling just how powerful she was, I knew that even if I followed through with my actions, it was impossible for me to run away from her. She'd just snap her finger and I'd appear before her again. In that case, should I use the Eye of Heraclius? I inwardly shook my head. That was a bit too dangerous. Furthermore, things weren't that bad. Then? Are you thinking of jumping? Considering I stopped mid-sentence, turning my head in Delilah's direction. She can talk? Her brow slowly raised upon seeing my expression. Cume. I coughed, trying my best to ease my expression. I'm not. I took a step forward for good measure. See? Delilah just stared at me quietly, her expression the same as it was before. The more I was subjected to her stare, the more uncomfortable I grew. Questions started to flood my mind. What does she want? Why did she suddenly stop me and not bring the others? I thought we had already talked. Did she have something else to say? Or is she going to ask me why I did everything that I did? If that's the case, how should I answer? My thoughts swam in all sorts of directions. They consumed my mind so much that I didn't notice Delilah slowly approach me. By the time I did, she was already before me. Ah! Her eyes were now leveled to mine. Something that I only just recently noticed. Before I used to have to look up to her. But now we were practically the same height. I had grown a little since the first time that I met her, and as I looked at her I felt unable to tear my eyes away from her. She was just so beautiful. By the time I realized I had muttered the words out loud, it was already too late as I brought my hand to my mouth. Realizing my mistake, I looked at Delilah only to see her look completely unfazed. The atmosphere turned awkward from that point. At the very least, until she spoke again. Finish your word. Wait, what? Delilah was now staring at me with a frown, a clear look of dissatisfaction marring her features. She looked kind of angry. Finish it. Finish what? Say it. I pursed my lips, looking at Delilah in confusion. However, feeling her gaze and looking deeply into her eyes, I could only sigh before saying, beautiful. What is? Oh. The hell? I stopped the moment I noticed the subtle shift in her expression. Thinking back, this wasn't the first time she had made me do something like this. Recalling the old times, a smile unconsciously formed on my lips as I relented. You what? You're really needy, aren't you? Say it. You're beautiful. Again. Sarah, you're beautiful. Again. You're beautiful. Again. You're beautiful. I didn't know how many times I was forced to say the same thing over and over again. I was also sure that Delilah had heard the same two words many times in the past. There was no denying her beauty. And yet, even though she had probably heard those same two words more times than I could count, she kept insisting that I say them. And so I did. Again. You're beautiful. The fact that she wanted me to say them meant something. I liked that. Liked her. So I was fine with saying it. You. Enough. Delilah eventually stopped me, her face looking as indifferent as usual. However, I knew that behind that indifferent expression was a satisfied one. The subtle curve in her lips told me all that I needed to know. I take it that you're satisfied, right? A little. Delilah replied slowly. A little. A little. She reaffirmed, prompting me to laugh a little. What was I supposed to do with this woman? The more time I spent with her, the more I struggled to understand her. But it wasn't like I didn't like it. All right, in that case, if you need me to say it again, I'll be there. Of course. Delilah nodded, as if it was a given that I'd do this again. I could only smile helplessly at her. Of course. Yes, of course. Seemingly satisfied, Delilah turned back, her black hair fluttering slightly under the light breeze as she brought her hand up to stop it. I lost myself in the sight. But that was only for a brief moment as Delilah's voice reached my ears again. I recently got engaged. Eh? The words hit me like a lightning bolt, yanking me out of my thoughts. I snapped my gaze to Delilah, a sudden pang tightening in my chest. What did she just say? She got engaged? When? No, it probably happened during the time that I was missing. Why? Why did she get engaged? All sorts of questions flooded my mind as I looked at Delilah, scanning her face. However, looking at her, I wasn't able to spot a thing as her expression turned serious. My father insisted that I get married. I thought back to the conversation that I had back in the Ivinus household with her father. He indeed wanted her to get married, but there was no way that he'd be able to force her to get married. How did he convince her? No, why did she agree? He said that getting married would help me get rid of suitors. I felt breathless listening to her words. I understood what she was saying. Orson had most likely insisted that she get married given how many households and people were trying to get married to her. Given that I died, she most likely ended up accepting one of the offers. I accepted, as expected. My heart sank further into my stomach, and as I looked at her, I saw her slowly raise her hand to expose a ring that rested right on her finger. This is the ring of my fiancé. Oh, I didn't even feel like looking at the ring. I could tell it was probably nice. Look at it. However, for some reason Delilah insisted that I look at it, and I did. As opposed to the fancy ring that I expected to see, the ring looked rather plain. It was entirely black and felt vaguely familiar. I told my father that I'm engaged and showed him this as proof. The more I looked at the ring, the more familiar it felt to me. It was really, really familiar. And then, slowly lowering my head to stare at my own hand, I saw it. The ring that was on my finger. It looked exactly the same. What? Then slowly lifting my head up to stare at her, I saw her lips slowly pull up into a really unfamiliar teasing smile. Hello, fiancé. My head exploded. Ugh. If you're going to puke over there. Don't puke close to me. As the cadets endured yet another round of teleportation, the weaker ones doubled over vomiting where they stood. The disorientation stumbled around like some sort of drunkards. Thankfully they had landed in what appeared to be a forest, and so there was plenty of space to vomit. Leon, make sure to stay alert. Of course, while the weaker ones were puking, the ones who were doing better immediately moved around the perimeter and carefully scanned the surroundings. With all of their training, they understood just how dangerous the mirror dimension was. They couldn't afford to lower their guard for a single second, and so Aoife got to work as she ordered the others to keep a check of their surroundings while the others recovered. If you spot anything, quickly report it. Do it as we've done before. Her words were met with several grunts as Leon scanned the surroundings, his eyes knit together tightly. As he looked around, he couldn't help but wonder something. Where is Julian? They were all supposed to have arrived at the same time. And yet he appeared to be completely gone. Where could he have gone? It's not just him. The Chancellor is also not here. Did something happen? Leon's eyes narrowed as his thoughts paused there. Swoosh. His thoughts came to an abrupt halt as two figures eventually appeared in the middle of the group. Chancellor. It's the Chancellor. The moment Delilah appeared, everyone relaxed. With her present, there was no longer a need to be on guard. On the other hand, Leon focused his gaze on Julian. Something about him felt off. He looked to be in a daze. No, it almost feels like he has lost all reason. His eyes and face were both blank, and he simply stared at the sky. Something was indeed off. Looking around, Leon quietly approached Julian and pulled him to the side. Is everything okay? Despite the question, Julian didn't answer. HM? What? He just made weird noises and looked completely out of it. Oi, hey! Leon shook him again, trying to get him to snap out of it, and it was only after a solid minute that Julian's eyes regained some sort of clarity as he looked at Leon. Oh, it's you. Julian's voice was rather slurred. Yes, it's me. What is wrong with you? Did something happen? Are you SI? No, nothing like that. Julian quietly dismissed him, raising his hand to show him his hand. Look at this. He pointed at the ring on his finger, prompting Leon to raise his brow. He felt that the ring was strangely familiar. But the next words that came out of Julian's mouth made him freeze. I'm engaged, apparently. Slowly blinking his eyes, Leon's mind froze for a moment. Then, as if finally recalling where he had seen the ring before, his head slowly turned in the direction of the Chancellor. That was when he saw it. The same identical ring on her finger. His face immediately grew stoic. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.